All right, welcome to another episode of Silver Lining for Learning. This is our 35th episode. We've gone through a lot. We've talked a lot of innovations, a lot of silver lining, especially from the global south. We've been to Africa, we've been to Nepal, we've been Myanmar, we've been to many different places. And today we're going to talk about something that's very global. And so today, co-hosting with me is Chris Didi. We have Punya Mishra and Kurt Bunk and Shangye Chen. Some are on the front, some are from the back. And today we're very fortunate to talk about the Global Online Academy. And that's a very big innovation, which I will not talk about when we have our guest because, so we have Michael Nachbar, I hope I pronounced that right. That's the executive director of the GOA, the Global Online Academy. We have Dr. Emin McCarran, who is the academy principal at Punahou School. That's a school in Hawaii. And we have Zoe Duane, who is a student of Punahou, but who has been participating in the Global Online Academy courses. So why don't we just get started by asking Michael to spend a few minutes to briefly explain what a Global Online Academy is. Michael.
Thanks, Young. It's good to be here. So GOA is a consortium of independent and international schools whose mission is to reimagine learning to empower students and educators to thrive in a globally networked society. And we do that through a number of different avenues. One is through student courses that we offer to kids around the world. We have over 2,000 kids taking semester and year-long courses with us. We do that through professional learning. So far, since March, we've worked with about 50,000 educators to help them reimagine what modern classrooms can look like, how to do competency-based learning and designing online learning experiences for kids. And then we work with schools to think about the systems that all of that needs to operate within, and working with school leaders and schools to think about how to support those different new ways of learning.
And I was just wondering, Emily, you have anything to add to that?
No, the Global Online Academy, GOA, is something that Punahou School has been involved in since its inception in 2010, so a decade ago. And I had the good fortune in that year to sort of run into my then principal's office and say, let me know how I can be involved in this. And I tricked them into letting me teach in that first year. So I had an advanced Spanish class in the first year of GOA with kids from a small group of kids, but from all over the world. And for me as a teacher, that just really helped me understand the potential of the platform. Distance learning is an old term. We've been, kicking that around a lot, but the depth of the relationships that I was able to establish with those kids were in some cases sort of more profound than the ones I was having with my students in the classroom on campus at Punahou. And I think it's because I was spending a lot of time sort of interacting with them asynchronously, getting a deep understanding of what made them tick through the lens of where they were from. So it was just a really powerful experience for me as an educator. And I've been delighted to be on the board of GOA the last few years as well, and see the interest of our kids at Punahou just really increase in learning in this context. So it's been a really neat thing to be a part of.
One big thing I've always been looking for is schools collaborating across national lines, across school lines. I think that's one of the things I've been impressed with is that students from different schools can take courses together, can go together. So Michael, can you tell us, how it started? How many member schools do you have? How big is your coverage right now?
So, and I agree, the collaboration piece, I think, is one of the most special parts of GOA. So it started 10 years ago, about 11 years ago. I was working at Lakeside School and we were looking at the field of online learning. And back then it consisted mostly of MOOCs. That was when MOOCs were really taking hold and getting a lot of traction. And then the other piece of online education was a lot of remediation and credit recovery courses. It was also the rise of like adaptive software and things like that. And Lakeside School in Seattle, that's where I was working. We were asking, none of those avenues seemed like the right approach for a school like ours, which meant, a school that valued relationship-based learning, right? Teacher knowing each of her students, where they are, where they're headed, and how they were going to help them get there. But also kids who were intellectually curious and motivated and wanted to dive into passion-based subjects and really, geek out in areas that they were interested in. And so we decided to do it ourselves. And one of the things that we realized early on was that would be really limited in scope. And so we invited other schools to think through what a program could look like if we were to pool our resources and do this together. And it was really, an amazing process. And the resources that we were pooling wasn't just financial, it was we were going to pool our faculty and pool our students too, right? So that collectively, everybody putting in a little bit, we could create something much bigger than anyone could do on their own. And so we started with 10 founding schools in 2011. Emily taught one of our first 5 classes. We had 120 kids enrolled that first year. We now have 150 schools around the world. We work with this year, we worked with about 3,500 kids in our student courses, and if we include summer. And then we have a bunch of other ancillary programs for kids. We've got a middle school program. We've got flex courses for high school kids. We have a capstone program. And one of the things that we also learned early on working with teachers like Emily, when she would tell us things like, teaching for GOA made me rethink my role in the classroom. It changed the way that I intentionally develop relationships with kids. And when we started really looking at that, and I should say here, we were lucky because we functioned autonomously from all of our schools, right? So we were a lab school in a sense, and our schools expected us to think differently about what these courses were going to look like. And that freedom with the expectations that these schools were putting on the program, that these courses had to meet the expectations of kids and educators from schools like Lakeside and Dalton School in New York, right? King's Academy in Jordan, Punahou School in Hawaii. These courses need to be commensurate with that. So the bar was always high on how we needed to design these. And so that led us to start offering professional learning work courses to teachers to help them think about how to apply what we were learning in our classes to their on-campus classrooms. And one of the reasons I think we were able to rethink so much was because we took all the safety nets of a traditional classroom environment out, right? We took away the synchronous time, we took away, right? And so everybody had to be really creative about how they were fostering, and building these relationships with each other. And teachers had to be really intentional about how they were getting kids to build relationships with one another, engage with the material, apply it in real ways. And so we've been kind of, doing action research for a decade and continuing to hone the model. And it's been really exciting.
So Michael, thanks for sharing with that, because I have always been impressed by your program.
Oh, thank
and you. So you are basically, you started with by some very prestigious schools, so you have a high bar trying to get to, but also 10 years was a long time ago, in internet ages, that you are driving some big changes. So let me actually try to talk to all the guests, then my other co-hosts will come in with the questions. I want to ask Zoe, how good is the course? What do you do? How do you feel? What did you learn from it? What's the story? How does it feel like, to be interacting with people you don't know, students from other places? Can you share with something, Zoe?
Yeah, definitely. So I thought so far my GOA courses has been a real like really valuable experience because I'm in neuropsychology. That's the course I'm taking, and it surprised me to see the different like diverse populations that decided to like join in this course. For example, we have people from, I know one of my classmates is from Texas, and then we have Florida, but we also have people from Thailand. And I was so surprised because the first day of school, we had our teacher immediately set up this Zoom meeting, and we got to get to know each other. So that kind of like overcame the whole issue with like feeling disconnected because it's online. That wasn't really a problem because we always communicate on platforms like Twist or email sometimes. So that was really cool. And I think I really like the course because it's very project based. So there's a lot of collaboration with other students rather than like a lecture and then test kind of format. It was a lot of project based things. And I think my favorite things that we did so far were about how like we put together slideshows or like we put together like projects that displayed different like neural psychological aspects of like the brain and stuff like that. And it was really fun because we got to like collaborate with other people, which is something like you wouldn't really expect to do on an online course, but GOA does that. And I think another surprising thing that surprised me this week in particular, because we were doing neurological disorders, was the competency that required us to empathize with other people. Because normally you would just kind of think like a science-based course is more like you teach the concepts and you apply them. But then there were competencies that dealt with like empathy and stuff like that. And it was really interesting. So I really like it so far, yeah.
Thank you. I know Chris has a question. I just want to mention one thing. Universities have been trying to do similar things, but never seem to have actually worked. Pune, I don't know if you remember when we were at Illinois, I was about to leave. There was something called CIC. I think Kurt might even remember that. It's the Big Ten universities tried to build in like physics 101 to say, well, you will teach that course. This was 1996, 95. So you will teach physics 101, maybe University of Indiana would teach biology 101, and maybe Wisconsin would teach some. It was really interesting, but never actually worked. But that was the idea. I would say, Chris, go ahead, have a question, and then we'll go to Punya.
Yeah, and in a later question, I'll bring up something that is working now in the States at the higher ed level, which is Western Governors University. But in the 90s, I attempted to do something much, much smaller than what you're doing. 4 of us were at an ed tech conference. We all taught at different universities. We said it would be great to do a course where we 4 taught it together, and it had 4 parts, and each of us was the expert in that part. So the course would automatically be better, because instead of teaching a not so good version of the 3 parts where you weren't the expert, you'd have all the experts together teaching. And that was a very difficult semester, I have to say. Not because of my colleagues or me or the students, but because of the devil in the details. So one type of devil in the details is, I remember when my dean found out about it. And he called me in and he said to me, am I correct that there's a bunch of people teaching in my school that I don't know about? And I said, yes, and even better, there's a bunch of students I'm teaching that you don't know about. Well, you can imagine how well that went over. So there was a territorial kind of a bureaucratic issue. If a student gets mad, do they sue all 4 places? I mean, that was a devil in the details. But the bigger devil in the details, ironically, was schedules. One university, the class would start at 9. Another university, nope, our classes don't start until 9:20. You take your spring week when? When is your spring break week? You got to be kidding. That's different than our spring break week. it was a nightmare. And so what I'd like to ask is that, thank God you're not in higher education, but is that something that logistical and kind of accountability issues, do those come up?
So logistically, one of the ways that we got around some of the problems that you're talking about, scheduling in particular, is that our classes from the very beginning were asynchronous. So we knew that we were going to have students in our first year, even with only 10 schools, we ranged from Hawaii to Jordan, and we couldn't have class at any set time. And so everything we designed was designed to be asynchronous, but again, with a focus on relationships, right? Like there was always been one of our main conversation topics with teachers is creating and fostering relationships. So the way that they design activities is meant to foster relationships. Finding time to meet with their students fosters relationships. But we also, the reason that we embraced project-based learning and CBL is because it allowed us to give students agency and ownership over their own learning. And it meant that the teacher didn't need to be in the class at every moment, right? We were designing lessons not for Thursday at 3 o'clock for 45 minutes. We were designing units that took weeks or projects that took multiple days. And that gave us a freedom to do this. On the logistics side, that was kind of the faith that was put in us was, figure out when the semesters need to start. We couldn't stay on any one school's calendar, but that also drove new innovations. So like in second semester in the spring, if you look at school calendars at 150 schools, there's no week where every school is in session. And so we ended up creating, I think 6 or 7 years ago, a capstone project that allowed students to take one of the topics they were learning about and apply it through the United Nations Sustainability Goals to a challenge that their local community was facing, and do a research project on their own, think about how the course materials apply to that, and then present it to a public audience. So we talk a lot about that, right? Publishing instead of handing things in. And that was, also another great way for us to think differently about how we're going to engage our kids. But there is a lot of trust. Our schools all give credit for GOA courses too. So it might be a teacher at one school, a student at another, but that school where the student is, so like Zoe will get Punahou credit for her course, even though her teacher teaches at a different school. And that also is pretty unique and special about GOA for sure.
If I could just add to that, that was a really important, and Chris, as you can imagine, a lot of our high schools function very much like departments in higher ed. Like we're counting how many kids we're teaching. We're really sure what everybody's course load is. And so there was controversy around that as GOA was launching. How is this going to disrupt that? And there was certainly, no small amount of fear. Like, well, if a bunch of kids take these classes at GOA, what does that mean for the courses that I love and teach on our campus? And so I think one of the really brave things that the Michael and the sort of founding board of directors at GOA did is just sort of put aside some of those fears and really boldly be like, we're not going to worry about those things. We hear you, but we're just going to try this and see how it goes. And it allowed for an unfreezing that I think even 10 years hence has had a remarkable impact on our schools broadly, because it's given us sort of permission to be sort of brave about things instead of perfect and counting all the widgets super precisely, and sort of blurring some boundaries in ways that I think have just made all of our administrative structures a little bit better.
That gets you out of the industrial model.
It does, yeah.
Processing kids.
What was Chris was saying, Chris was brave, and the course didn't go along very well. Otherwise, Chris, you could have created maybe a school that was out of 500 members now. So this is, it's a fascinating experience, because I'm glad, Michael, it's not dead and you're growing. This is because there was no guarantee. Literally, the market is there, the opportunity is there, but there's really no guarantee. So, however, I want to just give this back to Punya. Punya, you had a bunch of questions. ahead.
There are a couple of questions from the chat, but I want to just follow up this thread a little bit. And this is something that, Zhao and I have been talking about, understanding that, there is this existing system, and what you have done is created sort of a parallel system to that. And I was just wondering, is there like a subscription model? I mean, what does that structure work? Because at the end of the day, students have to know that these are being offered, and they have to be informed that this is through this other thing, but we will give you credit for it. I mean, there's a lot of negotiation and sort of figuring out that happens. And I want to just understand that better. What's the model? I mean, do schools give you money? Or how does that sort of structure behind work, which is usually invisible at some level to the people, even maybe teaching it, or the students for sure. So I just want to understand that, because I think what's exciting about this is this idea of sort of a parallel structure that has been a system that's been created there, sort of piggybacking on an existing system in some ways, but having some new elements. So if you can tell us a little bit about that and how that works. And I have a couple of questions for you, Zoe, from the audience that I'll come to you after this.
Sure. So financially, we are a membership organization. We're a nonprofit membership organization. From the very beginning, we launched off as an independent not-for-profit. So, even though Lakeside kind of founded just the investigation of this and like some of the groundwork that we had to do. But then once the other 9 schools, 10 total, came together, we became our own organization. So schools do they pay an annual membership fee, and that funds the model, and that's allowed us to grow so much. And, again, like back then when we launched, we had 5 classes in our first year. We now have 50 student courses, semester and year long, which is amazing, right? And they're not the typical core classes that we don't do world history. We do medical problem solving, right? Bioethics, neuropsych, right? These amazing courses that do kind of take a consortium to, pull in and find faculty from all of these schools. So, and then we hire teachers from our member schools, and then students can enroll in them as though they were a course at their own school. And then, today the membership fee now includes like so much more, right? Like we just keep going because there's so much more work to do. So we've coupled that with the middle school program. We do the capstone, and then it includes courses for teachers at schools that they can take almost in an unlimited capacity. Because one of the things that we recognized is that, to reimagine learning takes more than us teaching just kids. We had to empower faculty at schools too. And then, something that you were saying, Chris, about leaders not knowing how to support innovation, that's super true today, right? Like we find that we're working with teachers who are going back to schools with great ideas on how to rethink time and place. But, school leaders don't necessarily know how to fit that into a regular school model, right? Well, wait, if you only meet once a week, what are the kids going to do with the rest of the time, right? What about seat time? They have to be somewhere. And so, that's another way that we are working with our schools, is just bringing school leaders together to talk about how you support innovation on a pedagogical level, and then as a systems level too, and then culturally as well. That's definitely a big piece of this.
And for the students at Punahou, they see, when they're looking at our course catalog and planning their sort of program over 4 years, all of the GOA courses are listed in that catalog. So they just have like, this is a GOA course. So it's sort of it just expands our already really robust course catalog in ways that it's just there for kids. So that notion of like it being invisible to students, I think a lot of that is, I don't imagine Zoe knew much about the structure or membership fees of the GOA, but it's
exactly.
But I think Punya's question, Punya, you and I have been talking about the design a new system, because this is like GOA sounds like to me is like a common extra thing for all the membership schools. We all can pour in, we all need extra things, and one school cannot afford it, so now every school can afford. It's actually interesting. We have designed a new system, a new culture. It's that's why I was finding it fascinating. Puna, go ahead, carry on with your questions.
Yeah, so I mean, What I think is also interesting, and Michael, what you said, which is that these are these courses which typically you would not offer, right? I mean, medical forensics or whatever the one you mentioned, or neuroscience, the one that Zoe mentioned. And I think that's also interesting because what it's doing is tapping a much bigger network of passions and expertise of educators than any particular school could do. I think that's another sort of very powerful aspect of this model, because you're going to get a lot more interesting people when you have a larger group to pick from or choose from. So coming to you, Zoe, there were a couple of questions which sort of focused. This is Anne from London watching us right now. So she would like to hear a little bit more about how this project-based approaches worked and how much of it was, meeting, how much meeting online was needed as opposed to doing it through shared documents. And I want to piggyback on that one and ask how much contact was there between student to student? There is one which is sort of mediated through the teacher. Were there more connections that happened between you and other students as you worked on these projects?
Okay, so the first question I think was about the project-based learning. So I'll answer that first. So what happens each week? We have our assignments posted on the GOA Canvas website each week, and usually each week has a specific theme. So for like this week, for our course, our theme was either neuroplasticity or sleep. And so what happens is there's projects that are posted, and it's like, this project will be about neuroplasticity, and you will be researching about neuroplasticity, and then you will demonstrate your learning and then there's like a list of project things that you can do. So for example, one of them that I did last week was to illustrate the neuropsychological aspects of this personality disorder called paranoia personality disorder. And so we have to meet the criteria and the competencies that are listed on the website. So through your drawing, you have to demonstrate empathy. You have to understand how the neurological aspects of the disorder works, and how you have to analyze the various credible sources that you got your information from. So that's one example of how the project-based learning is. And then at the end of the week, we have this discussion post where all the students come together and share what they learned individually. And then what the post says is that it encourages us to respond to other students' posts. So one person would say, I learned blank, and then you would be encouraged to post under that person's post and say, oh, that's fascinating. And relating to that, here's what I found that might be helpful in expanding that conversation. So that's one of the ways the students have interactions with each other. And another way is that even though a lot of it we talk on this platform called Twist. And so a lot of students, what the teacher does is that they make a group on the Twist, and then they're kind of in the background. They don't really talk to us unless we're asking questions or need some help. But other than that, it's just the students. So the teacher will be like, so you guys figure out a way to meet on what day? And then we will be like, oh, I can do 3 o'clock at blank, 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 time or whatever. And then we will figure out a time, and then we will meet together. Or if it is too hard to find a time common for all of us, we share the documents. So it kind of just varies on how, where you are and what your time zones are. But a lot of our projects where it's we have assigned partners, the teacher assigns us based on our time zones so that it's easier for us to meet up if it was if we needed to meet up through Zoom or something. So yeah.
Thank you, Zoe. I see we have a number of questions from our users. They're very fascinated by your experience, but I want to go to Chris first, and then Pune, you can always ask the other questions. Okay. So Chris, go ahead.
No problem.
So I want to talk about an interesting parallel in higher education, which in the US is called Western Governors University. And it began in a similar way, kind of a stone soup way. I've got carrots, you've got potatoes, somebody else has got the meat. let's make up some soup that none of us could do on our own, which is a way of doing things better. And Western Governors was operating across state lines, so there were certainly bureaucratic issues and territorial issues, but they managed to get it going. But then the interesting thing that's been happening now is that people at Western Governors Central are starting to say, well, we're getting a sense of what the best ways are to do these different things. And so we're going to start offering things that are like the best of the best, or highlighting things that are the best of the best, and doing cross-course professional development to help faculty understand how to get better by watching what other people are doing, so that it moves from an exchange network into a kind of central that isn't doing things better, it's actually doing better things. And there is that element too to what you're describing, because it is project-based learning. So we know that it's based on modern knowledge about learning and the mind more than the traditional test prep kind of approach. So I think you may be disruptive in the way that Western University is starting to be disruptive. And I'm not using disruptive as a negative term or in the common way it's used. I'm using it in the way my colleague Craig Christensen uses it, which is that you build something on the side where it's not competing directly and people figure out that it's better. So maybe at Punahou, there's exit surveys for the seniors, and you say, which courses did you like best in your 4 years? If GOA courses come up disproportionately over and over and over again, then maybe the school starts to say, wait a minute, there's a signal here that we need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. That's so true, Chris. That's so true. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that you've got the potential for a disruptive model here that could make a big impact everywhere.
Yeah, and I would just say that it already has. So, I mean, I think our courses, our high school courses at Punahou are much more like GOA courses than they were 10 years ago. So the number of faculty that we've had teach in the GOA who have transformative experiences and then come back and say, hey, why can't, the rest of the classes I teach be more like this? And then those are really important questions. And then we sort of chip away at the barriers that are slowing down our innovation towards project and competency-based student-driven learning. So it's helped us build a dissatisfaction with the status quo in regular high schools that's been really productive for us. So yeah, I mean, Zoe can talk. Don't disparage your teachers on campus, Zoe, but I think you'll recognize students who take GOA courses recognize sort of through lines, and maybe it's a more polished version of something in the GOA class, but our faculty have worked really closely with GOA broadly. Even if you don't teach a GOA class, the GOA professional development team has had a transformative role with our faculty, helping us sort of chart a path towards a competency-based model. This year, helping us and 40,000 other teachers across the planet sort of get up to speed with operating really well in this new context that's not at all new to GOA. So it's had a remarkably disruptive, in the most positive way, impact on our high school.
Thanks, Emily. So Pune, I was just wondering if you could ask the related questions, that posed by Priyank Sharma and a bunch of others to Zoe. I think these are very interesting questions.
So Priyank, this is from India, a regular watcher of our show. And I had no idea what time it is over there right now, but he is up and about watching us. So he wanted to know if you would want to do the same course in a school that is project-based learning the way that you think works really well for you and for other learners? And do you see that? And I think, Emily, you sort of answered that question, but I want to take sort of Zoe's perspective on it. And you don't have to put anybody on the spot.
Okay, so I think a lot of the courses at Punahou actually reflect project-based learning. because in classes like chem or biology, chemistry and biology, there is also a lot of like group collaborations, especially in labs. So that's kind of similar in that way. If it comes down to preference, personally, I really like working with other people, but I think that it's also to have a good balance of independent study. So I think GOA is really good in the way that there are assignments that are specifically like independent research where you have to like learn by yourself to find the sources and learn the information. But then there are also other ones that are like you talk to other people and you discuss the concepts you've learned. I think when it's about like project-based learning, discussions and follow-ups of the projects are really important because I think that's where I've learned the most so far, is where after the project, we come together and discuss what worked, what didn't, what like other curiosities we might still have. I think that part is really valuable. So I think in Punahou and in like school, we also have that when the teachers give us this like a self-evaluation sheet where we assess how we collaborated with other people. But I think that process of asking questions at the end of like furthering the discussion is really good. So I'd actually like to see more of that in our own courses because I think that would be a really valuable thing to have. Yeah.
Thank you, Zoe. I have a question for this is for Michael and Emily, and mostly really for Michael, and Punya has one later on too, after I ask a question. I'm just really curious. Okay, so because the Priyanka asked a question about pedagogy, and Punahou has always been, kind of, innovative. You guys are 170, 180 some years old now, but you're still being innovative. I did a research on you guys. So, and of course, Lakeside was also kind of elite and innovative, you guys. The beginning 10 schools were really good examples. Now you got 150. Are they all of similar candor? Are you going to expand into public schools? How big do you think you can manage? There are multiple questions. Okay, so what kind of schools are you getting now? How big, and like this goes back to Crystal, how big a disruptor you want to be? Do you plan to become a global school with like 10,000 schools? Are you going to help other like emerging schools in the global South, from developing countries? I'm just curious about how can you manage the spirit of innovation, and where can you stop? Or maybe you will never stop. Maybe, I don't know. So just curious about that. Where do you go? I'd like you to disrupt everybody. Then you become a global school. Michael.
So on the question of the progressive schools and where we started, that was definitely true. I'll just kind of tell you a story that I had a conversation with a school head a couple of years ago, and something he said to me, I really respected. He said, "We're a traditional school and GOA is a progressive program that we can point students to when we need to, but we are traditional. It's aligned to our mission. Our pedagogy is aligned to that. We're not changing that. That's why families send their students here." And I respected that. We don't need to necessarily change that. I mean, that's their mission. That's the work that they're doing. And I think that was good. And I'm okay living as a program off to the side in a school like that. I think, for students who are looking for an experience in that environment, we can be that. So that's wonderful. So I think, over the past decade, the kinds of schools that we're working with have expanded. We have not necessarily on the student program side gotten into public schools. We've had conversations with them, but there's a lot more bureaucracy and red tape that needs to be navigated. And that's always kind of been a hurdle. I think potentially with charter schools, there could be a lot of work for us to do with them. We have done a lot of work, though, on professional learning side with public schools. So about a quarter of the 40,000+ teachers who worked with us this summer were from public schools. We've worked with public school districts. We've done workshops for public schools. So we're doing work in a wide variety of institutions, and that's really exciting. So like on the professional learning front, at least, we can really expand we can expand a lot. Chris, you brought up Western Governors University. We're huge fans of WGU. We actually just launched a partnership with them. The course that we launched in March was called Designing for Online Learning. And the goal of it was to raise the floor for where teachers could stand when they were thinking about designing online learning experiences. And we're working with them to adapt that for their school of education so that teachers everywhere can participate and get credentials and badges and graduate credits potentially for the coursework. So that's really exciting. And we launched that a couple of months ago. So, even just lining that up to one of the silver linings, and where this is one of the impacts, I think, all of the work that we've been doing on the professional learning front is changing the way that we're preparing teachers for the future. Like there are no schools of education teaching teachers how to teach online as part of their foundational skills, right? And we now can be part of that conversation to make sure that they are developing the tools and skills to do this work wherever they go.
So you still didn't answer a question. How big do you think you can be and still maintaining that philosophy? You don't have to answer it. Okay, I'm sorry.
I think we can be pretty big.
Yeah. Pune, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes. So this is a flip to, I think, the previous question the point that I alluded to before, which is this idea that you're tapping into sort of a network of educators who can then create these courses, which are very unique experiences for the students. I wondered whether you have thought of the flip, and this is actually sort of a young Zhao question in some ways, because I think students like Zoe and others might have what in that particular school might be a very niche interest. But there might be students across in other schools who might be interested in, I don't know, paleobotany or 14th century Spanish literature, right? So I'm wondering whether there has been some attempt that way, which is because you have this network, right? To flip the equation and say, hey, let's survey our students and see what kinds of idiosyncratic passions that they have, and maybe we can bring them together in some way, right? And there can be some very creative ways of thinking about that. So Zhao, you can thank me for this question later, but he's been infecting my brain, as you can see, over these past 35 weeks. But I was wondering if that has been something that you guys have thought about, because it seems like you have the foundation for doing that now, right? Because you have the network, you have all of those structures in place. And that to me would be sort of the next step of the revolution. Because, right now I'm guessing, Zoe, you saw this class in a list and it was like, oh, this seems interesting and I think I'm interested in it, as opposed to something that you spend your off time thinking about, which suddenly is a course, which one would have never thought about, right? I mean, I love doing visual wordplay. I never had a class on visual wordplay. I'm sure there are now on Facebook, there are groups of weirdos like me, and that's cool, right? And I'm wondering whether such sort of communities can be built of learners who bring their own unique passions to these things. And I'm just curious if you guys have thought about that. And
that's Pune, that's a great question. I've always wanted students to desire to ask for courses, and I bet over 150 schools you have enough students who will form a course. I'm pretty sure about that. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead, Michael.
Right? Every topic under the sun, you're going to find 20 kids, who will care about that. So I'm just curious, is that something you guys have thought about?
It is. On two things. One is we would love for students to approach us and advocate for that, right? Because if it's not born from them, then it's just another thing that we're trying to get them to participate in. So, and we've had a couple of kids do that in the past. So there have been students who've formed nonprofits with other classmates after a course is run because they want to keep working on a topic. So that's exciting when kids do that and they own it. The other thing is that we've talked about ways that we might be able to do that through, like we do flex courses, which are like 2-week modular courses on different topics of interest. Like we just did one, it was 2 weeks long on the US and the US election. So getting kids from all over the world talking about this in a confined time span, but diving into the material together from lots of different schools. So yeah, it's got huge potential. And we would love to work with kids on something like that.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is, again, it's a question of building the system to do that, right? So right now you're, I think, getting the students who are taking that extra step, but that might not cross every student's mind because you are asking them to, I mean, that's not a question we typically ask of schools. Are you here to meet my needs? I am being sent here by my parents to spend so many hours of my day, and I am incredibly lucky if it sort of overlaps with what I'm interested in. So I'm just wondering, I mean, one of the things could be just like a survey of the students, and
We've tinkered
just
with
write
this.
down your interests, right? And see what happens.
Yeah.
We've tinkered with this question at Punahou, and the way that we've solved for it is by inviting, we have in normal years or in previous years, we've had a short term between our 2 semesters that we call G term. And in that, students are invited to propose courses alongside teachers. So the course proposal form goes out to kids and to teachers. And the kids' classes are fabulous. They're super popular. They're the ones that everyone wants to sign up for. We had some students. Zoe, did you design a G term yet? Yeah, there, never mind. I'm talking about.
So Zoe, tell us a bit about how that worked. What's the process there?
So Punahou has this program. It's called G Term, where before, like right after winter break, when we're about to segue back into the new semester, there's a week in which students can propose and create their G Term programs specified to their interests. So what I did with one of my classmates was we proposed an international trip to Japan and Korea. So because me, as well as that other student, was really interested in Asian cultures, and we were like studying Asian languages in class. So we wanted to experience that like Asian culture through like a in-person experience. So we did that, and we proposed the proposal for a G Term through the G Term program. And after a bit, after working with the Wool Center, which is the international center for Punahou that deals with like various schools, partner schools in like the global context, we were able to design and then like put forth the trip. So this past January, right before like COVID kind of got everyone all messed up, we were able to go on that trip with I think it was around 18 different students that also signed up for the trip that were interested. And then we were able to go to both Japan and Korea, and it was a really fun experience. Yeah, and we learned a lot through their cultures.
So Zoe had to
Thank you.
recruit adults to travel with to help run the program, but it was her course. Yeah.
So
but I have to say that Punahou is a different school. Punahou is that's why I was talking about Punahou and Lakeside, your beginning schools, and that's what I want every school to be like. You allow students to create their own journey. Maybe your G term can expand into half a year in the future. I'm sure you're growing to that direction. I hope so. Students can grow, take 1/3 of your courses from your school, 1/3 from GOA, and then 1/4 from themselves. So that would be actually a wonderful future, and that might happen. Chris, you got a few points you want to make.
Well, I want to take you. I want to take you off the hook about getting bigger, because there's different ways to have impact at scale, and one way is a brand where you say, I want to make us the global source for doing this. And then you have to really become somebody different, something that's like a multinational organization. And my instinct is that that's probably not the right way to think about scale for impact in this particular case. My guess is a couple hundred schools is right-sized for this. And that you start to take it up to a couple thousand, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. But the other way to think about scale is to think about scaling not a brand, but a model. So you say, we've got this great model where a couple hundred schools who might be scattered all across the world, who want to make some kind of stone soup together, we can help you understand how to do that. And maybe it won't be project-based learning. Sorry, Young. Maybe it might be, we're 150 schools across the global South. We'd like a way to bring in, advanced technologies like AR, VR, MR, but we have very limited resources. So we're going to create stone soup around that particular type of innovation and see where it leads us. And I just think that if you want to scale for brand, fine. But I think scaling the model might actually lead to more impact for you and to more organizations who are doing really good things.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that, Chris. We were asked early on when we were talking to people, just kind of getting advice. And one of the questions that we were asked was, how are you going to scale this? And our response then is our response now, 20 kids at a time, right? That's how we scale this. I mean, the reason I think GOA works is because we pay attention to the details in our student classes. And we are, listening to Zoe, you're amazing. Like listening to Zoe, this is the first time I met Zoe, but the way she's talking about, she's articulating the competencies that her teachers are giving her feedback on. That's what we've been trying to do, right? That's the work that we are engaged in. And it means working with a handful of teachers, designing amazing classes for kids like Zoe. But I do think that our impact can be really big, especially through professional learning. I mean, it already is. We've been just so many teachers and getting them to think differently about how they design student learning experiences. But to your point of the network model, I think that has to be the future of education. When every school feels the need to reinvent the same programs and the same models over and over that their neighboring school is doing, it's just, it's resource intensive, and it's not necessarily what's best for students. So finding ways to work together and to cooperate on projects like this, I do. I think, as far as a model goes, I hope that we can be an exemplar for people to look at of ways that schools can collaborate and do more than what they could on their own and have a much greater impact. So in that, yeah, I totally agree and appreciate you pointing that out.
So thank you. I'm glad you get something out of our group, because we've been greening you for answers. And now I got to raise some almost kind of final question for each of you. Because, we are running this show, we want to showcase interesting, disruptive, innovative, good things. But also would like to say, over the past 10 years, you must have learned something that you could share with others. Because right now, if you go on the market, I bet there are at least 100 people thinking about doing something that you've done. Actually, I hear that all the time. People are always trying to do something. You also, Chris, talk about it like in a global South, they kind of take this model, they can run this. You may be familiar with our first guest, the Sugata Mitras, schools in the cloud. There's a lot of interesting things. But I'm really curious, as Punya was asking about the specifics, the interesting things. For example, you make it every school treat this as a credit. So when Zoe takes this, she has a credit. So in essence, she's graduating, meeting the graduation, as one of our viewers saying, from studying from home. So that's kind of things. I'm just wondering, what would you like to share with others who are aspirational, who are inspired, who wants to do something interesting, new, but also alongside existing systems? I will start with you, Michael. What anything you want to share with our big audience?
I think one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is that pedagogical and program change can't happen in isolation. And it can't just happen in pockets in individual classrooms. I mean, that's great. That's a start. but we have to look at school change as a system. And it has to be looking at program and pedagogy, right, which includes also scheduling and the role of time and place and seat time and things like that. But we also have to look at the way that school culture impacts that. And then we also have to look at the way the school systems and operations support the culture. So, that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, the way that administrators are supporting teachers to think differently about ways that they are designing student learning experiences, the way that trust is being built, the way that teachers are being provided training and professional learning, the way that schools are funding it and supporting it, right? So, I think that's probably one of the big things that I would offer is that the classroom change, the pedagogy is important, but as it relates to culture and operations and the system, school as a system is critical to do any of this in a lasting way.
Thanks, Michael. So, Emily, I don't want you to share the same thing because I want to also say, the 10 schools you got together, that was really amazing. So it's like Chris getting another 3 or faculty to teach a course. It's actually, that's how we started with this whole thing. That's how we start Silver Lining. We just hang out. We just say, hey, let's do this thing. So Emily, you can talk a little bit about how do you keep the schools coming? Because schools principles change, school has changed. How do you keep that going? That's what called sustainability.
Yeah, well, I mean, the incredible thing that Michael and the GOA team have done is they've created a really strong sense of allegiance to an ethos about how to say yes to cool ideas and how to do right by kids in new ways. And so I think once someone has taught at GOA or is associated with GOA and even, takes a class from GOA, they have a connection to that endures. So I know Michael has stories of lots of people who taught in GOA and then gone on to be principals or heads of school. And so then they bring their new school in because it's a organization that's just created a lot of opportunity and windows to our aspirational futures for folks. And, speaking from someone sitting in a school, those can be few and far between, especially these days. It's hard to move schools, and what GOA does is it sort of is a manifestation of saying yes to cool ideas that are about people and relationships and the best of what we know about the science of learning. And if you can create little pockets of that and little sort of bright spots in your community, whether it's through GOA or some other organization, or just having that way of showing up in the world that you're going to figure out how to say yes to small wins, whether it's a kid proposing a course or a teacher wanting to try something new, that GOA is really sort of emblematic of that for a lot of people. And I think that's been a huge part of its success.
Thank you, Emily. I'm really happy that it's here. So that's the first thing. I'm really happy. So Zoe, I would just want to ask you as a student, not necessarily GOA, but also have you explored other courses? We had students, learning from MOOCs, we had students learning from online. How have you spent your COVID time as a progressive student?
Could you elaborate on the question? As in, are you asking?
Well, basically, have you I found COVID a very I don't like COVID, but I like staying home. So when I'm staying home, I'm never doing one thing. I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot more than actually without COVID, seriously, because I'm meeting with more different people. I was just wondering, as a student, when you are stuck at home, there's so many students are stuck at home. In the US, they call the average high school instructional time by a survey is like 3.6 hours now. That's during COVID, which is really sad. But I think not going to school sometimes in my mind is cool. I think going to school a lot of times maybe a waste of time. So I was just wondering, have you learned anything new? Have you tried something different besides GOA?
I think COVID, especially for kids, as I've heard from other kids, has impacted students a lot because although courses and organizations like GOA facilitates like offline communication. So like when we're not in school, kids don't really have the ability to like reach out to other people. So without that like platform and like source of communication, I think what happened during distance learning was that a lot of students felt very like isolated and on their own. But I think that also kind of propelled them to go out and look to develop new relationships. Because what happened was for my class, in addition to the platform that GOA provided us with, which was Twist, we have like a separate group chat that we made individually just to like help each other informally offline. So I think like one of the things that I learned was how to like maintain relationships on like an online platform. And I'm doing this right now for my school course in Punahou. I have like this physics group chat where we talk about things and we like discuss things out of class. And so like that's one thing I learned. I think in terms of like how much time I spend for school, I think it varies for various students. It depends on the commitment level and like your curiosity level for certain things. But I found that during COVID, I think I've spent more time definitely like at school because a lot of our assignments are asynchronous. So we do it independently. So there's no like set instruction time where it's like, oh, you have 1 hour to do this. Oftentimes you can like choose to spend 3 hours or just like 30 minutes. It depends on your like own commitment level to like fulfill the assignment. But I think personally, I've had more time. And I mean, I think it's a good thing because then I'm learning more.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael, Emily, and Zoe. Now, Chris, you want to introduce your next episode?
Yes, a week from today, we will be hearing about exciting innovations happening in the country of Turkey, including a lot of bottom-up innovations by teachers in Turkey. That will be at a different time. It'll be about 2 p.m. in the afternoon Eastern time to accommodate our speakers not having to come in the middle of the night in order to present their exciting ideas. In addition to the episode description, there is a blog on the Silver Lining for Learning website about this so that you can learn more about it in advance. And we hope to see you.